Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Insight, where today we're going to be talking about bionic prosthetics. And we're joined by Wayne Williams, who's from Bionics for Everyone. And Wayne, it's great to see you here this morning. Welcome.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Alistair.
We've got lots to talk about, and prosthetics is always a very, very big subject with all reach families. And I just love the fact that Bionics for Everyone is basically an information service. Tell us a little bit more about what you do and the platform that you run.
Yeah, basically we created Bionics for Everyone so that those with limb differences or disabilities in general can get information on their technology options free of any commercial influence. So we created the site specifically so somebody can go there, learn about devices, learn about the technology as part of the beginning of their personal research into which prosthetic they should get.
And the information that you have, because you sound like you're from, I would suggest North America somewhere.
I am. I'm from the eastern part of Canada, and
Although
of
you're
course spent a lot
talking
of
to
time in
us
both
today from You're talking to us today
Thailand, from
from
Thailand.
Thailand, I believe. But
Yeah.
so, in terms of your information, is that information that's completely valid and useful and applicable for people here in the UK, despite the fact that you're based in Canada?
Well, certainly all the technology, we divide it between devices versus technology. So the technology articles that we read on our website are applicable all over the world because that's the background technology. The devices, the availability of those devices varies. So some devices are available in the UK that are not available in the US or Canada and vice versa. Although in general, if the device is out there, they're all in process in terms of trying to get approved by other countries.
And we were chatting a little bit before we started this interview. And one of the things that is great to hear is how far ahead almost of the rest of the world that the UK is when it comes to prosthetics.
Yeah, you certainly have a couple of groundbreakers. One that a lot of people are familiar with is a company called Open Bionics. They have a product called the Hero Arm, and they've been a groundbreaker in two areas, actually. One is affordability for upper limb bionics, and the other one is in appearance, because they revolutionized the idea that a prosthetic could be cool, could be interesting. And so they've done that, and it's had a tremendous impact on its users, both children and adults alike, but especially for children. The internet is full. YouTube is full of videos, by the way, of kids who are, crying because they're so happy they got their Hero Arm, and that's one area.
Yeah, and of course we've spoken to Joel and Sammy from Open Bionics many times here at Reach, and also in the series of interviews. So let's talk a little bit about some of your findings and your advice to people, because it can be very overwhelming for any Reach family when they start going down the road of looking at prosthetics. So where's a good starting point for people? Of course, have a look at your website, but what would you advise them to start thinking about when, let's say they're at the very early stages, they've got maybe their child is still a baby and they're looking at the idea of prosthetics. Where should they start?
Yeah, well, we actually have created a resource specifically for people who are at the start of the journey. We have a complete guide to bionic arms and hands and a complete guide to bionic legs and feet on our website. And, those articles, those sort of cornerstone articles are structured, first of all, to give them background information. What are these devices? How do they work? And it's important. I think I mentioned to you in the conversation earlier that everybody who loses a limb or has a limb difference, their residual limb, the remaining limb is personal. It's unique. It's just like a fingerprint. And these devices all use different control systems. So it's very important that the two are compatible. And so the starting point is, I think, with those kind of guides, get the background information, then start to learn about the devices. And you're just trying to arm yourself for sitting down with a prosthetist and having an informed conversation. And that's really the process I think people should go through.
Because that's a really interesting point. Some people might get really excited by something they see online, but that might not actually be applicable for their child. So it's really important to get that right advice. And when it comes to the conversation with the prosthetist, I knew I'd get in trouble with that word. When people are having that conversation, what are the kind of things that they should be listening for when they're getting advice?
Well, I think first of all, of course, is the background knowledge of the prosthetist, because it differs considerably between lower limbs and upper limbs. So some people are some prosthetists are quite conversant with lower limbs, but not as conversant with upper limbs, and vice versa. So the first thing you want to do when talking to a prosthetist is make sure that they understand the domain that you're working in. And so I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, an openness to a variety of devices. Because as I just mentioned to you, I think there are now 15 bionic hands on the market, or there will be by the end of 2021. And you're looking for the one that is most compatible with your child, or the person who's lost a limb. And you really don't want someone who's locked in on 3, because that's the 3 that they're familiar with. They need to be scanning that horizon, learning about other devices, and know which devices are most applicable to which situations.
And in your experience, how often would a child change their device? Obviously, a child is growing, so that is a big element to it. And of course, there's a whole cost element to it. There's the convenience element, and so on. And again, that's going to be really individual to the person, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of aspects there. I mean, one is that in general, people change their devices every 5 years. Now, children, as you say, are growing, and there are a couple of companies. I think Open Bionics is one of them. I think Unlimited Tomorrow is another, that are now starting to cater to the fact that children are growing. I don't want to misquote anything here, but I know at least one of those companies has a program where you get 50% off as you trade up. So if a child's going through a growing spurt, they get a discount to trade up, and that matches the changing size of their limb. But the other thing that you really got to watch with kids is, of course, if the device is not well suited to them, and if they don't get the training and the support, they're going to stop using it. And so, they may want to change their device much sooner. So it's important that they get sort of under a solid footing in terms of the use of the device, how to control the device, and choosing the right device, and that helps them get more use out of it.
And that's a really interesting subject. We hear a lot about families who get devices, and they have a very mixed reception in terms of whether the child adapts well to the device, enjoys the device, and so on. What are the kind of things that parents should be looking at? So let's say they've got a new device for their child, and they're watching their child interact with that device. What are the sort of things they should be looking out for to see whether this is positive or maybe not so positive?
Well, I think it actually starts before the device, because what happens is, in order to control, say, a bionic arm, now the lower limbs are different, but if you're talking about a bionic arm, in order to control that, you have to have decent muscular control. You're trying to generate a muscle signal that the sensors in the arm pick up, and then they translate that to commands for the bionic hand. So the training, the dedication to training, to developing that muscle strength, so that you can generate clearer and cleaner signals, is a huge factor. And this is an area of research which has shown that there's a lot more room for growth in these training processes than we thought previously. So that's the first thing I would do. Is I would, and now a lot of these companies have software programs, so you can hook them up to a virtual device, and they have games, and you can you can have them train. It's like anything else. If they get really good at that, when they get their device, they'll find the device a lot more useful, and because it's a lot more useful, they'll use it and won't discard it. So that's the number one factor right there, is training.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really interesting one. And again, some children will be more keen on spending that time on training, and others will be less inclined.
Yes, and the other thing is, I should add about fit too. I mean, the fit of the socket, and because the sensors have to be pressed against the skin to work, and if the socket doesn't fit well, and you know how some kids are. I mean, some kids will trudge through no matter what; they won't say much. But if that socket is not well fitted, and especially if it doesn't work in changing circumstances, like the arm is cold, it's hot, it's sweaty, if it's not really well thought out, they won't get good use from the device. And so I think what parents should watch for there is really how much they're using the hand, the bionic hand. If the child's not using the bionic hand for very much, then I think that's probably an indicator that something's wrong, and then they need to explore whether it's the socket, the sensor, it's the control system, whatever it may be. But it's probably time for a trip back to the prosthetist's office in that circumstance.
And certainly, as the child is getting older, having the conversation with the child, and a very frank and open conversation, because as you said, some children just might not open up to their true feelings about how they're reacting to it. They might see that their families have invested a huge amount of time and effort, and they almost don't want to let them down. So it's about having an honest conversation.
It is. It's not an honest conversation, but also recognizing too that it's not just functionality. I mean, I could point you to videos online on YouTube of children who are just receiving a new bionic hand, or maybe they just got their fundraiser, just completed their fundraiser, and they know they're going to get a new hand. I mean, and they're just torrents of tears of how happy they are. So there's a psychological component. So certainly you want the child to be using the hand as functionally as possible, but you have to also remember that there may be a component there that has more to do with appearance and acceptance. And so these things both of those things have to be watched.
Well, you actually taught us this brand new phrase, which we absolutely love, which is the aesthetics of prosthetics. And it's becoming such an important aspect. And we know from talking to the guys at Open Bionics and the work they're doing, and also Nate from Koala, who we've talked to in this series as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's been an absolute game changer in the way that children with limb differences are perceived by others, isn't it?
It's been unbelievable, and yes, Open Bionics they were the groundbreakers on this. I mean, it's so significant that what I've been pushing for in a number of conversations with researchers is a study to quantify the emotional impact of these devices, because it's not taken into account by the NHS or by any other insurance company. It's like there's basically the manipulation test and whether or not you improve the dexterity with a bionic device. But really, if you ask me, to be honest, I'd say 70% of this is an emotional issue about getting acceptance, and that devices like the Hero Arm should be viewed as should be valued not just for their functionality but for that component of it, because it's huge. I don't think we've even come close to measuring it, the difference between a child that is proud of their arm versus one that is trying to hide the fact that they have a limb difference.
And this has probably made a big difference with the whole point of whether a child even wants to have a prosthetic as well, because there's a big debate within Reach about prosthetics and when to start using them. And again, that's a very individual conversation. But of course, if
Mm-hmm.
a child is seeing a prosthetic as being cool, then that's a complete game changer for them.
Yeah, and I don't think we've seen the full impact of this because, of course, Open Bionics hasn't been around that long. But they have cases where other kids in the classroom are asking if they can have a bionic too. The kids who have both natural hands, and of course, this elevates the status of the child with a limb difference. As compared to historically, like up until the last say 5 or 6 years, kids are always trying to hide their limb difference, and that's it's kind of crushing when you think about that, because you don't want someone to feel stigmatized by something that is beyond their control. And so now you've introduced the opposite. People are saying, people are interested. They want to see how the arm works, and the kids showing it off in class, and the other kids want to be like them. I mean, it's just a complete psychological 180, and for the better. So yeah, it's just a huge issue.
You've talked there a little bit about the progress and how things are changing, and the fact that the aesthetics have changed dramatically over the
Yes.
last literally just few years. What about the future? Where are you seeing things headed, so that maybe someone who's got a very young child at the moment, what kind of prosthetics do you think might be around in, say, 5, 10 years time that they might be able to really benefit from?
It's really hard to say. Like organizations, some of the charitable organizations, I'm sure Reach has wrestled with this issue as well, have started to develop a program where they say, well, okay, we're going to start you off with a very simple device, a body power device, and then a very simple myoelectric or bionic device, and then they sort of graduate to more complex ones. But there's such a change right now, Alistair. I mean, the number of technologies coming down the pipeline, the developments, sensory feedback, all these other things that were never present before. That's very difficult to answer that question. I honestly, I wake up each morning and I'm not sure what the next announcement or research paper is going to be. It's that dynamic right now.
And in terms of availability, this will always be a big subject. We touched on it a little bit at the beginning, where we were saying some things are only available in certain countries, but of course every manufacturer wants to be all over the world and global, and we live in a global society these days. What about the UK market? You were saying we were very much at the forefront of all of this. So the majority of things that people get excited about, the chances are it will be available for them here in the UK by the sounds of it.
Well, you're certainly ahead of the game. So I think it was last August, the NHS approved the use of microprocessor knees. That is something that has not occurred on the public side. Well, when I say that, I should say it's not occurred on the public side in Canada for the most part. There may be exceptions, but the NHS formally approved that. That's a huge step. Now we're still short. Bionic arms have not been approved, to my knowledge, anywhere as a public health approved device. That's really a funding issue, I think, more than anything else. But I think the UK is leading. There's no question.
I mean, that really is great news, and we get to hear about it pretty early on here at Reach, because just the sheer nature of the organisation, and it's really positive to see those UK developments taking place. We talked a little bit about the psychological thing of aspects of prosthetics, and I know that obviously for you, you're more involved in the technical side of things. But where do you see that balance coming in between technical and psychological when it comes to fitting prosthetics?
Well, I think it depends. It depends so much on the person and on the payer, whether it's an insurance company or a public health, et cetera. Because right now, what happens is the payers are all focused on dexterity in the case of hands, or functional improvements. Let's put it that way. They're interested in, what the person can do with a device beyond, say, a body-powered device as a justification for either paying or rejecting the use of the device. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think there's, like we said, the whole psychological aspect of it has not been well documented. So it's not being taken into account in the insurance decisions. And I think, what I'd really love to see is I'd love to see that happen. I'd love to see the organization start to say, wait a minute, there's something going on here. And then it's not just the upper limbs. I think I'd mentioned to you, there's a company, another UK company called Limart, that makes these beautiful leg covers for prosthetics. And it's changed the psychology of everyone who's wearing those. Adults that, have been trying to hide their prosthetic for 30 years. Say it's a leg prosthetic, are suddenly put on shorts or a skirt and going out in public because it looks so good. So, we really need somebody on the research side or the government side to just take a moment and say, wait a second, this is obviously happening anecdotally. There's a lot of evidence for that. Let's quantify this. Let's put it in a study, and then let's use that study as justification for approval, and include that as part of the process for approval. And I think that would change things. And I wanted to add as well with the UK, why that's so important. I mean, I know it's important to you in the UK, but for those of us who are sort of interested in the global issue of accessibility to prosthetics, especially bionic prosthetics, once you guys go through with that, once you've, say, approved the use of microprocessor knees, that has a global impact, because suddenly a lot more people have access to them in the UK. Suddenly there's a lot more people that can be studied for how much it saves on the stress and wear and tear on their other joints, and all these other things like backs and other hip and knee joints. And that allows us to draw from that much bigger data set and say, see, we need to approve these devices because you're going to actually save money down the road. People aren't going to have severe back and other joint problems because you gave them the right device at the right time. That's why we're cheering for you in the UK to keep doing this.
No, and that's great to hear, and it's lovely. We're very good at knocking ourselves here in the UK, so it's great to actually big ourselves up occasionally and say, you know what, we're doing really well with stuff. But it made me think a little bit there about, you were saying the call for research, and we know some of the contributors to this interview series have talked quite a lot about people getting involved in research programs, because the more data you have about the use of prosthetics, the more valuable that's going to be. How much of that research is taking place at the moment, and how can people maybe find out about it and find out about how they can participate?
Well, that's an excellent question, actually, because historically there's been a real problem for researchers to get people to participate. So you'll see published studies with only 2 or 3 or 5 people, which is, I was in the data analytics business on the healthcare side. And so, we're used to cohorts that had thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of participants. And so it's been difficult, but this has been all part, it's all connected. The more that people are sort of encouraged to show their prosthetics and are proud of them, the appearance, the more willing they are to engage in studies, because it's quite a private issue, right? And so the way they can is it's basically the internet, social media. You will see calls on social media from researchers looking for people to participate, and we have our own set of user satisfaction surveys on Bionics for everyone. Because we're trying to get people who use devices to share their knowledge with other people who are considering the purchase of those devices. And and we try to help researchers as well. So you can get involved by, I think, being aware of the subject on social media. You can search for hashtag like Bionics or prosthetics, and you will see researchers on there calling for people to participate.
Yeah, and that's a really good tip, actually. And again, we should refer people to the resources page of the Reach website, where we put up a lot of links to different places where people can find out more information. But social media is a really interesting subject that you just brought up, because that's changed everything. We've seen that from the perspective of the various contributors to this series of interviews. And of course,
Yes.
your work, the fact that you can now reach young people through social media, that will have changed a huge amount too. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I spend 2 to 3 hours a day on social media, and a lot of that is I'm on Facebook. There are amputee support groups, and of course, these groups don't want anybody with a commercial interest in there, but we don't have a commercial interest, so they accept us to share knowledge about technology. But to be honest with you, I learn more from them than they learn from me, and it's just because those support groups have, I think, the ones we belong to have a total of 70,000 amputees, and they're sharing information with each other about sockets and liners and blisters, like wound healing, about phantom pain, and all these other things, and it's just an extraordinarily healthy exchange that's going on there, and we try to participate by adding sort of the technological component of it. But that's I don't want to say it's new, because we're new to it ourselves just this past year, but I see a lot more openness going on, and I think it's incredibly healthy. I think just think about that. Maybe you're feeling, you just went through an amputation. You've got a phantom pain. You've got a wound healing problem, and you're feeling down. You feel like you're self-conscious. You don't want to go out and all these other things. Well, you can go to these online sites, and you can talk to people who have the same experiences that you've had. And when someone's feeling that way, I mean, I see sometimes they might get 100 responses from others who with limb differences, who are helping them and encouraging them. And I think it makes a difference. I think it's probably one of the healthiest uses of social media I've ever seen.
Now, you mentioned earlier on, and we did talk about it briefly, about this whole concept that you're completely independent. You don't have any financial tie-ins with any companies whatsoever. And one of the dangers here is potentially that people get very excited by something because they're told, oh, this will be great for you, where there's a bit of a commercial
Mm-hmm.
interest taking place. What kind of words of advice would you give to families to make sure that they're getting the right advice and they're not maybe being, dare we say, sold to, and finding that they're using stuff that isn't necessarily the best for their child? There's a really air of caution around this, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I like to use the phrase an informed patient is an empowered patient. And so, I think I told you before the interview, I said, our only constituent is the end patient, the end user. And so everything we did on our site was designed to try and convey that information, to arm those prospective end users with the knowledge they need. And really is to start their personal research. So we're not trying to supplant the prosthetist at all. I mean, the prosthetists are wonderful, dedicated people in general, with extensive knowledge. But what you want to do, of course, when it's you personally or your child or your relative who's going through this process, is you want to be 100% informed about all of the technologies that are out there. I'm talking the general technologies, and also the devices that are available. And you want to do that so that when you sit down with that prosthetist, you can have an intelligent conversation with them about what your options are. I would recommend
Yeah.
that as the number one most important thing for anybody in this process.
And at what stage do you recommend people having that conversation? When should they start that conversation? Literally from birth, or what sort of age do you think is a good time to begin?
Well, I think as soon as you're aware that that the person is going to require a prosthetic and prosthesis, as soon as that occurs, you have to begin your research. And because this is not, believe me, I've spent a year doing nothing but reading all the research studies and looking at all the devices and interviewing people. I mean, it's been a year of 60, 70-hour weeks. And I just feel like now I have a decent grasp of it. A lot of people don't have that much time, which is why we and you guys create resources for them so that they don't have to go through the sort of detailed work that I've done. But I would start at the beginning. As soon as you're aware that your child is going to going to need, or somebody in your family is going to need a prosthesis, I would start reading about it then. And unfortunately, there are resources that allow you to do that and not spend as much time, and just get that background information.
And another area which is really interesting when it comes to prosthetics are the various adaptations that people can have with prosthetics, which can often be fairly generic because they just sort of clip on or bolt on or so on. What's your kind of advice in terms of people's research there?
This is a crucial component. Most of the people that you find online that will talk, or they have a YouTube channel or something, and that they've been very successful with their bionic prosthetics, have a number of what we'd call different terminal devices. Okay, so the hands have historically been quite fragile. So if you're going to go out and work in the garden and use a little chainsaw or something, you don't want to use a bionic hand for that in general. You want to switch to a clamp. If you're at work and you're working at the computer, yes, the bionic hand is good, the multi-articulated hand. But if you're going to go out in the warehouse, you want to switch that off and you want to put on a clamp. And so you have different devices that you can attach, is what we call the terminal device. And most people who are really satisfied with their prosthetics, prosthesis, tend to have multiple devices. So they have, for different circumstances, they'll have 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, so that's a big area for people to do their research as well. And
Yes.
generally, with those, how are they? You call them terminal devices. Are they then a little bit more generic? So actually, they probably could work for a wider variety of people than the actual prosthetic itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons for that is because when we talk about a multi-articulated hand, I mean, there's lots of elements of control there. It's how you switch grips. It's, how you enact those grips. There's a number of other features. But when you're talking about these other terminal devices, they're generally quite simple. They're like, rotate the wrist and open and close. So you'll find that a clamp or a powered hook, those devices will generally work for a much broader segment of the population than a specific bionic hand, which might, because of its control system, be really good for some and not good for others.
And again, where do we stand in the UK when it comes to those terminal devices? Are we pretty ahead of the game on that as well?
Well, actually, those are generally made by a couple of the big companies like Autobach, and so they're available globally. So you're finding most of the innovation, the UK innovation for upper limbs, bionic limbs, is in the hand area.
Okay, so and again, this is all stuff that's available, and again through your resource pages and our resource pages at Reach, there's a huge amount of information. And I guess the biggest thing you would probably advise is for people to join the community so they can actually share experiences, share their recommendations from their own child's lives, especially as they grow up, because they can then pass it on to the next generation, as it were.
I would. In fact, I mean, we're talking outside prosthetics for the moment. And the first thing I would do, say if I had a child who required, we're looking at an amputation or had a congenital limb difference, they needed a device. The first thing I would do is look for a local charity, like Reach and others. I would go there because it's not the information that they're giving you and the support they're giving you goes well beyond devices. And so there's a whole sort of psychological process for the family to go through, an understanding community, being able to talk to other people who have had similar experiences, and the devices are really only a part of that. They're when you get to the technology, come to bionicsforeveryone.com and read about it. But before that, I would advise become involved in your local charity, and that's a very helpful thing.
Yeah, and actually, people find they get a huge amount by sort of giving back effectively by sharing their experiences. It almost helps them in the process, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, many of the founders of the charities that we're talking about are themselves amputees, or they have congenital limb differences. They've been through it. They understand what it is. A lot of the participants become peer counselors, so they volunteer their time to help others who are going through the same thing. I mean, it's really one of the more beautiful communities on the planet, and the place, the gathering place for that is unquestionably, your charities that are doing the work in the community.
Wayne, it's been fantastic talking to you, and it's great to get this very informative advice, but also with a complete overview of the situation when it comes to prosthetics and where people are. And really, all it leaves me to say really is to ask you for your final words of advice to any family. You know, they're looking at prosthetics. It might be at a very early stage, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
huge amount of resources, as we've said, available to them, but sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming for people. There's just so much out there. What sort of advice would you give to people to be able to get that balance between getting the right information but not getting too bogged down?
Well, I would just say reach out. I mean, there is somebody where no matter where you are in the world, there is somebody that's not too far away who's been through this, and they can give you some advice verbally. They can connect you to people, and then they can point you to the right information. Because obviously, if somebody has lost a hand or an arm or a leg or whatever, I mean, there is a group of people, a subset of the broader community I've been talking about, who have a lot of deep knowledge of this. Just connect to them. It'll save you. Right away, 70% of the work you'd have to do on your own will be gone because you'll be able to talk to people who can help you, and then that'll identify for you the specific sort of area that you want to read about, and then you can use a site like ours to do that. But that connection, reach out and connect. That's the number one thing.
Yeah, and it's so great today that there are so many organisations. I'm not just speaking about Reach, but obviously Bionics for Everyone, and so many other organisations and platforms and forums and things that people can get involved in. The great thing is that information is available today, isn't it?
It is. The support's available today. It's current. Okay. I mean, one phone call or one connection through the internet or social media, can connect you to somebody. And as long as you're open and you're reaching out, somebody is going to respond and help you. And you'll find, because there is an anxiety, right? You're sitting there, you're facing a new situation. There's this ocean of information. You talked about being overwhelmed. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and everybody's going to feel that way. You can feel overwhelmed, but you reach out, you connect with somebody who's got some background knowledge, but they've been through the process, and 70% of all your troubles go away because they'll help you get through it, and then you're really just talking about refining your knowledge for your specific situation.
Well, Wayne, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, giving us some fantastic insights, which is obviously what this series is all about, and certainly given us a lot to think about when it comes to prosthetics and the fact that the technology is changing so fast. And by people reaching out to us here at Reach and also to you at Bionics for Everyone, they'll be able to get the very latest information and of course, then be able to make informed decisions based on their own child. So, thank you so much indeed. We're going to make sure that people have a link to your website so they can see it. But thank you very much indeed for joining us today. And to
Yeah.
everybody watching, thank you indeed for joining us. And we'll see you again next Saturday. Look forward to seeing you then. And of course, in the meantime, please do go onto the Reach website. If you're not yet a member, that's where you'll find out where you can join. And again, that all valuable resources page, have a really good look at that and make sure that you get all the information you need and reach out to other people. Wayne, thank you again and all the best for now. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Oscar. All right. Bye.